Hello and welcome back to Tuk-Tuk Travels. Now, I skipped out early on summer school because my parents are coming to visit, and we started off our fantastic Indochina adventure in Cambodia at the ruins of Angkor. Capital of the Khmer Empire between the 9th and 15th centuries, Angkor began in 802 AD when the Khmer Hindu king Jayavarman II declared himself a god king. This basically meant he could set up his own city and religion and say, I am a god king, you will obey. Not a bad thing to do, I suppose. Dates for the end of Angkor range between 1351, when Angkor was first put under Ayutthaya suzerainty, which is when they have to pay tribute to the Ayutthayans, and in circa 1431, when the Ayutthayans sacked the city following a rebellious uprising. Now, a few of you may recall that the Ayutthayans were the rulers of Thailand, and will remember that Ayutthaya was the capital up until 1769, when the Burmese sacked the city after many attempts. The current ruling dynasty, the Shakri, was established in Siam in 1782. Almost a century later, in 893 AD, the capital of the Khmer Empire was moved just a few kilometres to its current location by King Yasovarman I. Now, one of his more famous constructions is the Phnom Bakleng, which, dedicated to Shiva, it was built 2 centuries before Angkor Wat, and was at the time the spiritual centre point, the spiritual centre of Angkor. I never made it here, but apparently it's meant to have some of the best views of the Angkor Wat complex over sunset. We had our sunset at another temple I'll tell you about later. The most famous temple in the city of Angkor, which is actually synonymously often referred to as the entire city, is Angkor Wat. Built between 1113 and 1150 by King Yasovarman II, Angkor was originally a Hindu temple dedicated to Vishnu that was converted to Buddhism during the succeeding reign of Jayavarman VII. Interestingly, Angkor Wat is orientated to the west, whereas most previous and even future Angkor temples are oriented to the east. Nobody really knows why this is, but it does provide actually a very good opportunity to wake up ridiculously early and watch the sunrise over the entrance of Angkor Wat, which is just frankly, it was incredible. It really was amazing. Perhaps not so interestingly, or at least surprising, the visitors to Angkor Wat amount for 50% of all foreign tourists to Cambodia each year. It's phenomenal. After Yasovarman II, King Jayavarman VII moved the capital of Angkor again to Angkor Thom and built a new spiritual centre in Bayon. This was probably done because Jayavarman was Buddhist and was responsible for converting the previously Hindu Angkor to Buddhism. A great builder, Jayavarman VII was responsible for Ta Prohm, which was completed in 1186 and made famous for the Lara Croft films, Nik Pien, which is essentially a Khmer spa, Priya Khan, which completed in 1191 and used for the film Two Brothers, the one with all the tigers. It's quite a good film, actually. Angkor Thom, which was the capital, and Bayon, the Temple of Many Faces. After Jayavarman's death in about 1218, Angkor had a Hindu revival, which resulted in a lot of Buddhist iconography being completely desecrated. And this desecration actually lasted up until the 14th century, when Buddhism again became the land's dominant religion. So as such, you'll find in Angkor a lot of broken Buddhist statues. Now you could think that this is due to the effects of time and weathering, but actually it was just the people just destroyed it. We had 2 full days to look around Angkor, and on each day we did a separate tour. The first day was what was known as the long tour, because you do lots of the temples in the outlying areas. We started in Bante Sui, which is built of red sandstone and consecrated by Jayavarman V in 967 AD. Interestingly, this is the only temple that was not ordered to be constructed by a king, but rather a courtier named Jevanavalabun, or something like that. Following this Bante Sui, we went to East Mebon, which is a temple that used to be in a reservoir but is now all dried up. It has lots of pretty lion statues. Niak Pien, which was the spa. Prakan, and a few small temples thereabouts. On the following day, we woke up at about 4 to do the short tour. Interestingly, our short tour actually lasted longer than the long tour. That's because we added a few extras in. As I said, we woke up quite early, well, very early, to go watch the sunrise over Angkor Wat, which, as I said, was absolutely fantastic. We then went back to the hotel for breakfast before going back to Angkor Wat and then seeing Phnom Bakhleng, Bayon, which is the Temple of Faces, which was really interesting. Actually, quite interestingly, most temples in Angkor are built in different courtyards to give the essence that they're bigger than they actually are. The way Bayon was constructed was to actually make it feel a little claustrophobic. So it's quite a big temple, but inside it's all sloped, so it feels smaller. And I believe this was so you could feel close to spiritualism with less distractions. I'm not entirely sure, but that would make sense. Following Bayon, we went to Takeo, Ta Prohm, Bante Kadai, and a few others, including the Terrace of the Leper King, who actually I mentioned earlier was, what's his face? The guy who moved it the first time. Yeah, him. And the Elephant Terrace, where the king would watch elephant displays. We then watched the sunset at Playa Rup. So I'll talk to this a little bit later. Now we got there just in time for the sunset, had dinner, sat down. The sky was beginning to turn a little bit orange, and a man came up with a torch and forced everybody off, because it would be too dangerous to descend to the temple in the dark. So we paid extra to go watch the sunset from the top of this temple to get a good view of the surrounding, and you can't actually watch the sunset because it's too dangerous. So in the end, our tuk-tuk driver stopped along the way and we took photos here and there. A bit disappointing, but can't do much. Now, I know I've gone through that quite quickly with a brief history, but Angkor was incredible. Words cannot describe. I think 2 to 3 days is enough, otherwise you get a bit templed out. But it's just phenomenal. You walk around and there's just history everywhere. Beautiful carving. I mean, this is the biggest pre-industrial city in the world. The second largest city, I mean, it covers an area of about 169 square miles. The second biggest city, pre-industrial, was a Mayan complex in Guatemala, and that covered between 30 and 50 square miles. So you see the difference between the largest and the second largest. Angkor is just huge, but I mean, you can't walk around. People cycled around, but in the heat it was a bit crazy. I mean, while we were there, it didn't get below 42 degrees Celsius. but it was just amazing, walking around this temple complex. And each king either had their own temples dedicated to family or to religion, or they moved the capital around. And really, words can't describe. I insist you all go to Angkor when you can. It was well worth it, an absolutely fantastic place. Very, very good. After our few days in Angkor, we went down to Phnom Penh. Before I tell you about Phnom Penh, I feel I must give you a brief overview to the Khmer Rouge. Established in 1960 as the Communist Party of Cambodia, in 1975 the Khmer Rouge overthrew the Cambodian general Lon Nol, who had himself overthrown Prince Norodom and proclaimed himself president. This led to the 4-year rule of the Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, that resulted in the death of millions of Cambodians, and is often now referred to as the Cambodian genocide. These deaths were either the result of explicit political executions, or just the byproduct results of the communist ideologies. The attempts at agricultural reform led to widespread famine, and insistence on absolute self-sufficiency led to disease and overworked forced labour, which contributed quite a bit to the death toll. The Khmer Rouge abolished schooling, religion, currency, private property, education, everything like that, in order to establish an agricultural communist state. Eventually, in 1979, the Khmer Rouge fled Cambodia and the monarchy was re-established in 1993. But by this point, I think it's estimated 2.2 million civilians had been killed, including most of the intellectual elite of Cambodia. And it's not the nicest things. However, the Cambodian government is very keen on tourists visiting the killing fields, I think, to learn the history in a sort of defiance. The Cambodian people are very, they remember this, as well they would, but it's a piece of history that they want to remember, that they never want to forget, to show these things can happen, and hopefully this will never happen again. While we were in Phnom Penh, we visited Chiang Mai, which is the most famous of the killing fields. These are places that victims of the Khmer Rouge were taken to be killed. Now, Chiang Mai had around 10,000 victims, and in the centre of it there is a memorial stupa which houses about 5,000 skulls. A lot of the site is still open for you to walk around, and the open burial pits still expose human remains after the rainy season. Following this, we went to S21, which was one of the most notorious prisons for the Khmer Rouge. Housed in a former high school, it had around 20,000 inmates during the 4 years of the Khmer Rouge, of which only 7 survived. The inmates and their families were continually tortured until they signed confessions and then were taken to be killed. Those who survived did so either because they had required abilities such as painting or mechanics, or they were just young children. But 7 out of 20,000. So, after Phnom Penh, we then travelled on to Ho Chi Minh City, which I shall tell you all about in the next video. Until then, goodbye.